I work for a union that represents a lot of people in Canadian newspapers and radio and television. One of the things we see occurring is a fragmentation, particularly of the advertising market, but also of the circulation and the viewers of this media. And I wonder if you agree with that and what implications it has for that idea of having agenda-setting media, you know, necessary to have mass media that are important media that are agenda-setting. And the other, does fragmentation offer us opportunities in terms of alternative media and being able to get a message out? How do you
Well, I don't know the details about Canada, though I can't imagine it's very different from the United States and other countries. And the main tendency is towards mega mergers. So the number of separate, I hate to say independent because they're all more or less the same anyway, but the number of separate news sources has been declining for a long time. And it's declining even more now, like when you start getting, you know, Disney, ABC, or whatever it is. All of these things are turning into real mega mergers, and this is just part of what's going on in the business world altogether. There's a big move towards kind of mega corporations. There's a big merger frenzy now. It's partly because there's so much financial capital floating around. It's pretty destructive for the economy, but that's the way things are going. And it's pretty strikingly true in the media as well, even internationally. So like I just came back from India a couple of weeks ago, and the big question there is whether the media, which are pretty right-wing by and large, should they resist takeovers by Murdoch and guys like that, which will what will happen if they do what's called liberalizing the economy. Liberalizing the economy means letting the guys with really big money do everything and kick everybody else out, because that's the way markets work. So when should they sort of give away the Indian media to Murdoch and, you know, Conrad Black and these other characters, and the big empires that they run, like ultimately major corporations like, you know, Disney and Warner and so on. Now, another part of that is cutting back on news. So it's perfectly true that news coverage is being cut back. News offices are being cut back. There is less coverage, but that's kind of like, you know, it's like the reason I'm late today. Which nothing to do with the weather. It had to do, I think, ultimately had to do with deregulation of the airlines. If you go back far enough, one effect of deregulation of the airlines has been to transfer costs to the public. In fact, a lot of automation has that character. Automation, you know, they tell you it's saving money. It certainly is saving money for businesses. But if you think about it, it's transferring the costs, and you know it very well. I just asked about your own experiences. You have to go to you call the newspaper to get your subscription changed or something, or call an airline to get a reservation. Well, you know, they carry you through a lot of, you know, you have to go through a menu and you push buttons and you wait and they play pretty music, and you have to have a book, you know, because it's going to take you half an hour to get through. And the same is true of just the way the airline industry is run. The seats are closer, they don't take care of the planes, you know, you try to keep right at the margin because you can make more profit. And all of that does make more profit, but it just transfers the costs. I mean, as far as the economy is concerned, I mean, nobody measures the costs to human beings, so you can't get a number. But it's not clear that, you know, that it's not even clear that the benefits of automation outweigh the costs, if you think about this. Well, that's part of the reason for cutting back news. I mean, you can get a bigger advertising budget if it's you know, I don't know, gory murder or something like that, or whatever people watch, than if it's a news program. The advertisers aren't that much interested in advertising on the news programs. So therefore, just partly advertiser-driven and partly for other reasons, news is and commentary and discussion and that sort of thing is being cut back. Also, news and commentary and discussion have a kind of a dangerous aspect to them. They are, to some extent, democratizing. That is, they tend, to some extent at least, to get people involved in what's going on. And the goal is to keep people atomized, to keep them out of the public arena. So let's have them watch, you know, one of these shows where people talk about their personal lives or something, then they're not going to be in trouble at all. Then they're just going to become atoms of consumption, the sort of utopia. On the other hand, to get back to, but remember, there is a sector of the population that does have to have information and knowledge and so on. The management classes, decision-making classes, the ownership classes, and the real elite press, I don't think it's changing very much for them, like the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times and the Washington Post, and that sector I don't think is really going to change much, because they go to a very, and they are the agenda-setting media. On the other hand, the rest of the media, yeah, they may very well go the way of, say, the tabloids, the Mirror and the Sun. I mean, take, say, Britain, where back in the 1960s, the two big tabloids, the Mirror and the Sun, they were labor papers. With a lot of craziness, a woman with two heads and that sort of business, but a lot of news and information and a kind of social democratic point of view on the world and labor oriented and so on. Now it's just like the National Enquirer, the thing that you watch for laughs when you're going out at the supermarket. Plus the racing forums and whatever else you can sort of manipulate people with once you've driven any out of their heads any idea of solidarity and cooperation and working for a better life or getting involved in the political system and so on. So that I suppose will continue, and because unless people like us and others like us stop it. But the natural tendency would be for it to go in that direction. So it's a kind of fragmentation, but I think it'll leave the agenda-setting media, the elite media, not all that different, because they do serve a function, the indoctrination function, and also just the informing function for the decision-making sectors of the population. How about alternatives? Well, there are plenty of alternatives opening up. And unfortunately, they haven't. I think people like us haven't used them. I'm going to say take cable television. That has allowed for some years now plenty of options. The way the laws work in the United States, at least, communities, in order to get a cable contract, say Warner Brothers or one of those guys, has to commit to, in a particular, say in Boston, they have to commit some resources to community cable, which means that places like Cambridge and Chelsea and Somerville, the little towns around, they actually have cable stations with equipment and things that people could do something with, and they're just not used. I mean, they are not going to, they're not going to be on the scale of the networks, but they are ways to reach people, and if they're not being used, it's our fault. There are ways to do it. Some people do, but nowhere near what has been possible. And the same is true of other kinds of information technology. It allows a lot of options, and I don't think it's been used. And that's partly because the left and the labor movement have abandoned a lot of the turf that they ought to be developing. There's a lot of soul-searching that ought to be done, in my opinion, about these matters. I mean, sure, there's big forces out there that are trying to destroy you, but there's a lot of opportunities that aren't being taken. The new telecommunications stuff is another case in point. It's going to be interesting. How that develops is going to make a big difference. Like the rest of high tech, it was all publicly funded, so the telecommunications systems, including the internet and everything else, ought to be publicly run because they were funded by the public, mostly through the Pentagon system, the way everything else goes. Now, of course, by now, like, say, computers or, airplanes or anything else, what's called private enterprise, meaning publicly subsidized private profit enterprise, what we call free enterprise, they want to take it over, just like they took over radio and television and print and everything else. And they tell you what they're going to do with it. I mean, it's not a big secret. They want to turn it into more ways of atomizing and marginalizing people and making them more stupid and ignorant and passive and obedient and so on. So turn it into a home shopping service, say. or you know, some other form of, you know. Actually, I remember an article a couple of years ago, I think it was in the Wall Street Journal or somewhere, where they were describing the fantastic potential of the internet, because interactive, or all the interactive stuff. And the idea sort of was like this is from memory. By now I may be remembering my retelling of the story, but it was something like this. The population was broken up into two categories, women and men. And for women, it would be a home shopping service. So you're sitting there looking at the screen, alone, of course, not talking to anybody. You're sitting alone in a dark room looking at the screen, just you and the PR industry. And something is shown on the screen which you don't want, but of course the whole advertising industry is designed to create, and has been for hundreds of years, to design and create wants, to make you think I gotta have that or else something terrible will happen, like, you know, I won't look like the model or whatever you're supposed to be. So all this stuff pours in at you, maybe to children and certainly to women, and they're going to be trapped into wants. But since it's interactive, you don't even have to go to the store. You just push a button and, you know, pretty soon something arrives at your door or something. So that's for women. What about for men? Well, for men, they had a different idea, also using the interactive character. Every red-blooded American male is supposed to be sitting with a six-pack watching professional football games, alone, of course. That's very important. The way it is now, you can just sort of watch and cheer and scream and, you know, yell at the coach or whatever you do. But since this is interactive, it's now going to be possible to ask the whole, you know, 150 million man audience what they think the next play ought to be. Like, do you think it ought to be a pass or, you know, a kick or something or other? And everybody will be able to push a button and say what they think it ought to be, and then it doesn't have any effect on what happens. You know, then the play is what it is, but they will then put on the screen, you know, 68% said it ought to be a pass, and that's what. So that's the interactive technology for men. And for women, it's home shopping, and for children, it's just, you know, trap them and destroy their minds and so on. Yeah, sure, that's what, that would make perfect sense. I mean, if you were a high-paid PR, you know, in some public relations office, isn't that what you would be thinking? I mean, that's what you ought to be doing. So it could become that, or one variant of that or other, or it could be something that really does bring people together in certain ways. I think it's double-edged, even the good side of it, because at best it's bringing separated people together in a medium that doesn't involve personal interaction. So, like, we're human beings, you know, we're not from Mars or something, and there's a big difference between face-to-face contact and virtual reality, you know, contacting somebody somewhere who maybe doesn't exist except in your mind and so on. That has its negative side even at best. On the other hand, it is a way of, and has been used pretty efficiently, in fact, to mobilize people, to get information to them they wouldn't get otherwise, it's been a spur to significant action. Actually, take, say, East Timor, which is something I've been working on for years. The change in the scale of the popular movement after the technology came in is very dramatic. I mean, before that, it was a matter of waiting for your friends in Australia to mail you some clippings. Now, lots of information is around very fast, and people are doing good things with it. And this is largely because a few people, like Charlie Shiner and White Plains, are using it intelligently. It can be done, and it can have a positive effect, and there are a lot of things like that. So it's, you know, what happens to it is going to depend on the interaction of corporate power and popular forces. And I don't think it's predictable any more than it was predictable, say, with radio or television or cable or anything else. It's something that can be worked on. So are there other alternatives? Plenty of them. I mean, for example, now it's possible to, with desktop publishing, it's possible to publish extremely cheaply. Something like, say, Z Magazine is published literally by 2 people. It would have taken a big staff and, you know, angels and so on and so forth just a couple of years ago. And in fact, for the third world, the technology is incredible. It sounds high tech, but in fact, for third world countries, Desktop publishing is a dream. It's very cheap. It's way cheaper than printing presses and all this sort of thing. And it enables a few people to do it even in their spare time sometimes. And the same is true here. It offers lots of possibilities. And I think that's true of technology in general. It really offers lots of possibilities. Depends who's got their hand on the lever.
To what extent is General Electric influencing American nuclear weapons policy?
General Electric and nuclear weapons policy? I don't know. I mean, I don't think they care much, to tell you the truth. I mean, as long as, in fact, take, say, nuclear power. Right now, they're not interested in pushing it very much. And the reason is it's not cost effective. On nuclear weapons policy, I frankly doubt that the board of directors of GE cares a lot one way or another. I may be wrong, but I don't see why they should care.
We were just talking about it in school, and we learned that they do influence.
About, sorry?
We were talking about that issue in school, and we learned that they do influence.
Sorry, I can't.
They are influencing foreign policy. I mean...
GE?
Yeah.
Oh, they're influencing foreign policy.
No, sorry, not foreign policy, but nuclear weapons policy. And that they have a big nuclear weapons industry.
Well, they certainly, part of the way, and they certainly are, not only GE, but lots of other corporations are part of the nuclear system and make money from it and so on and so forth. But I really don't think it's a major issue for them now. I mean, they don't care about the nuclear weapons. What they might care about is nuclear power. But right now, that, for just business reasons, doesn't look very cost effective. Remember that oil, the price of oil is now down to about what it was in the 50s. It's very cheap now. In fact, it is part of the reason for the sanctions on Iraq, just to keep more oil from getting into the market, because they don't want the price to go down too low. If the price goes down too low, it starts harming the American economy, because the energy companies are American and a lot of money pours in, and you recycle petrodollars. So it's always been, there's always been an effort to try to keep oil prices within a certain band, not too high, not too low. Now they're getting too low. But one effect of that is that, one consequence of that is that nuclear power is not economical. And as far as I'm aware, at least, the big corporations are not all that interested in pushing it. You can even see cutbacks, and rather significant cutbacks in funding for the longer term for the longer term possibilities for nuclear power, like the the whole things that are on the border are being cut back. The big reactors, fission research, stuff like that, which simply means that the big corporations right now don't see it as a high priority. I think they may change their mind, but I don't. I'm really speculating. I don't have any more information about it than you do, but I don't see why they should be much interested in nuclear weapons policy, and I'm not aware of anything specific.
Good evening. My name is Corky Day, and I've long worked in the alternative media. Bill asked earlier if the fragmentation of the media could be good. You said the situation was more of concentration of the media. But in the alternative media, we are being fragmented. Aren't we, as alternative journalists, spreading ourselves too thinly? And wouldn't we be better off with fewer but stronger and bigger alternative periodicals?
Well, I didn't realize that the question was about alternative media. I thought it was about the mainstream media. So
well, it may have been, but
yeah, okay. But let's talk about the alternative media. Well, there is plenty of fragmentation, but now let's see if we're on the same wavelength. I mean, one thing that's going on is a lot of very local, very special issues sort of things, which don't interact much with one another. That kind of fragmentation may reflect something that's at some level healthy, that is, interest in a wide range of things, but I don't think it's a very healthy phenomenon in general. I think that's in fact why you're getting things like the Buchanan phenomenon. It's part of the core concerns of a great many people, and rightfully, have been sort of abandoned by fragmentation of special interests on the left. If that's what you mean, I think
Yes.
that's something to worry about. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that's part of, right. In fact, I strongly agree with that. That's why somebody like Buchanan can come in and pick, just basically pick up slogans that he's taken from the left and turn them into a monstrosity, because the people who ought to be doing it aren't. There are many of them engaged. There are many of them, and they're engaged in good things, but very narrowly focused often, and off the main track of most people's concerns. That's a problem. I think it's been a significant problem. I've written about it for quite a while and spoken about it a lot myself, but I felt for a long time that that's a serious problem, and one that people who regard themselves, who feel that, they're part of the effort to extend justice and freedom and things that are called the left, they ought to really be worried about and thinking about.
So are you encouraging them to get together more?
Well, only in the sense that I'm trying to do it now. I mean, I think it's a dangerous tendency, and you got to overcome it from within. So yes, if that's encouraging, sure. I think
it would seem to me that are you satisfied?
Oh.
I mean, I don't, like, I'm not suggesting a party line or anything. I don't want to encourage in that sense, but I do think it's a question of fundamental importance, and I think the left has very much harmed itself by not taking it seriously, and is causing serious harm in the society at large, of which something like the Buchanan phenomenon is a reflection. I mean, there was a section of the Nazis that did the same thing. The left wing of the Nazis had slogans of the left, and may well have meant them, but they worked them into this crazed, more general system. And that's what you find in the Buchanan phenomenon. He really is appealing to people, to many people, on issues that they have every right to be concerned about. And nobody else is talking any sense to them. So they'll listen to this crazy stuff.
It would seem to me that public education is a major tool, could be a potential major tool for manufacturing consent, to use the term.
Or dissent, It's kind of like technology. It depends what you do with it.
Yes.
I mean, the public education system, at least in the United States, was set up pretty much as a socializing system. It was really set up primarily to sort of take independent farmers and put them into factories, something almost like that. Actually, Emerson once said, we're educating them to keep them from leaping at our throats and strangling us, which is what they might do if they knew what's going on, something like that. But it doesn't have to be like that. Public education can be very liberating.
And here in BC, we're looking at cutting back charter school funding and homeschoolers from minimal to none. And while the public education system, by the latest poll by the Ministry of Education, shows that 4.2% of grade 12 graduates feel uncared for, and where 11.2% of grade 12 graduates feel that what they're learning is irrelevant. What are the dangers in cutting back education funding to so-called alternatives that want to pop up?
What kind of alternatives do you mean?
Anything from something like the Sudbury Valley School to
private schools,
to private Catholic schools. I mean,
well, there's something. There's kind of like a fundamental point to face, and that is, as human beings, do we only care that? Am I supposed to only care that my children get educated, or am I supposed to care that the kids down the street get educated? Now, that's a question that goes across the board on every issue. There is a very powerful, extraordinarily powerful part of the entire sort of capitalist ideology is making you worry only about yourself, lose any connection to other people, destroy solidarity. Just leave solidarity in the hands of the investing class. The rest of you just worry about yourself. This goes way back. You read the working class press in 1850 in around the places like where I live, which was in around New England, which was the center of the early Industrial Revolution. It was a very lively working class press run by mechanics and what they call factory girls, young women off the farms and so on. Very interesting reading, but one of the things that they were denouncing was exactly this tendency, what they called the new spirit of the age, gain wealth, forgetting all but self, which they regarded as degrading and demeaning and destroying, their human values and so on, correctly. In fact, the labor movement throughout its whole history has been fighting against this. Work together, because we're all in it together and we want to help each other. That's a very different ethic. That's just a traditional ethic. It took modern capitalism to even question it. And I think that what questions it is very anti-human. Well, that shows up in connection with the schools. It comes down to the question, do I care whether the kids down the street get an education? Well, I think we should. I think we should care that but notice, that means public education.